welcome. It's good to have you back.
Right.
So last time we spoke 7 days ago, I think we spoke about certain topics, as you remember,
Yes.
and I just wanted to go through since we covered a lot of topics previously. I just wanted to go a bit towards the history and your participation in and finding of the Bhagavan's path. So how did it come about that you came to this interest? What were your previous interests?
Um, it's difficult. It's difficult to say. That is, I I suppose the easiest way to put it, I was looking for some meaning or purpose to life, and material purposes didn't seem to me to be a worthy aim for life. I wanted to know what this life is all about, or something. I mean, I was looking for something without really having a very clear idea what I was looking for. And in that frame of mind, I traveled to India. All I knew about India before going there was that it was there were many spiritual traditions and in India, and it generally it's in my naive young mind, I had that idea. India is a country where one can go to look for some spiritual meaning of, but my ideas were very vague. All I knew, I was looking for something, and so I traveled to India. I was just 19 when I traveled to India, and I spent about 18 months traveling around various parts of India.
In which part? Was it south or?
Well, when I first came, I went up in the Himalayas. I was in Himachal Pradesh, and I walked up to Ladakh, and then sometime in Kashmir, and then I came down to Delhi, Agra, Varanasi. Then I spent some time in Nepal, just a couple of months or so, and then I traveled to South India. I was in Sri Lanka for a few weeks. I came back. It was while I was in Sri Lanka, but I first heard about Bhagavan. Someone I met when I was staying somewhere, and some other person was staying there, and they asked if I'd heard of Ramana Maharshi, and they showed me Arthur Osborne's book, and I read Bhagavan's death experience. That kindled my interest. And I thought I would visit Tiruvannamalai when I returned to India, but for some reason I was prompted to travel north, and I spent that summer again in the Himalayas visiting various Kedarnath, Badrinath, Yamunotri, and there was a pilgrimage place in the Himalayas. And then when I came south again, I was interested. I'd heard about Vipassana meditation, and I was interested in doing a Vipassana meditation. That was what first prompted me not to go straight to Tiruvannamalai on my return, because there was a Vipassana meditation course that was expected to start.
Goenka's course.
Goenka's, yes. He had a place near Igatpuri in Maharashtra. But that course I was planning to join was cancelled because he was sick or something at the time. So, but then I traveled to North India. Then when after I'd spent the summer in the Himalayas, there was another course in Hyderabad, again, Goenka course. So I came down and I did that. And after that, from Hyderabad, I traveled to Tiruvannamalai. I didn't really know what to expect. I thought I would probably stay a few days, maybe learn a little bit more about Bhagavan or whatever. I wasn't really expecting anything much, but when I came to Tiruvannamalai and I read, the first book I read was an English translation of Who Am I? And as soon as I read that, I was convinced this is what I've been looking for, because I probably didn't understand very much at that time, but I understood enough. The main point is to know who am I. And it just struck me, yes, before knowing anything else, we first need to know what we are. So I just felt this is exactly what I've been looking for, though till then I didn't really know what I was looking for. So though I thought I may stay for just a few days, I ended up staying for 20 years. So that's how I came to Bhagavan.
So during this journey before, what were your impressions generally of Ladakh, for example? Because generally when I hear people go to these places,
yes,
I usually hear Tibet, or maybe someone goes to Himalayas also. Yeah, you went there. Bhutan also. I really heard Ladakh.
Right. As I say, I was looking for something, but I didn't really know what I was looking for. And I was also like when I went from Himachal Pradesh to Ladakh, it was a 10-day walk, and that there was a military road. In those days, it was the highest road in the world, but it wasn't open that summer because too many bridges were damaged. So it was a 10-day walk with no villages, and I just with a few other people. So I like to experiment with all sorts of things. But as I say, I was young and adventurous, and I was looking for something, not really knowing what I was looking for. So I was curious about everything. So when I was in Ladakh, I visited various of the Tibetan gompas, the monasteries, and because Ladakh is basically Tibetan culture, Tibetan Buddhist culture. And one of the friends I was traveling with for a while, a Canadian, he was very much into Tibetan Buddhism. So I picked up a little bit from him, and I was curious about it. And later, after returning, I also visited MacLeod Ganj, where Dharamsala, where Dalai Lama lives. So I was a little bit interested in Tibetan Buddhism, but I never learned very much about it. And whatever books I got, I was interested in reading. I remember I read an English translation of the Bhagavad Gita, but which interested me, but I can't say I understood a lot. I also was reading whatever books I could get hold of. And I remember reading some Alan Watts books and Aldous Huxley's Perennial Philosophy. So whatever books I got, I could get hold of, I was reading. And they all interested me, but nothing, even this Goenka meditation, I was interested in doing it, but it wasn't clear what the purpose of it all was. I mean, it was interesting to try out different things, but nothing really convinced me until I read Who Am I? And as soon as I read Who Am I, that it was very clear to me, this is what I've been looking for. This is what the real goal of life is. And it was very clear, but I was struck both by the goal that Bhagavan was pointing at and the directness of his path, as I understood it then. Of course, since then, my understanding has grown much deeper, and the deeper my understanding grows, the more I appreciate the simplicity, clarity, and depth of Bhagavan's teachings, and the practicality, how Bhagavan's teachings are so practical. That is, if you can, I mean, if you compare Bhagavan's teachings with what is closest to them, which is Advaita Vedanta, I mean, Bhagavan's teachings are the pure essence of Advaita Vedanta. But if you compare his teachings with the so-called traditional understanding or traditional interpretation, there's a huge amount of totally unnecessary complexity in Advaita Vedanta. So many unnecessary things, whereas Bhagavan has simplified it so much, and in simplifying it, he's made it much more practical, and it made it much clearer and more practical. And Bhagavan, in Bhagavan's teachings, it's very clear how the philosophical side of it is directly pointing at the practice. And if you understand the philosophy correctly, the practice becomes clear what the practice is. I mean, the whole thing ties together so well, which you can listen to, or you can study Advaita Vedanta in the traditional way for a lifetime without understanding what the actual practice is. In fact, many Advaita, they almost say there's no practice. You've just got to understand. You've just got to recognize the truth of it. So, whereas Bhagavan is very, very practical. He gives the practice is very logical. I mean, the practice logically follows on from Advaita Vedanta as it's taught by Bhagavan in a simple, clear way. So I was very fortunate, but early on in my journey, before getting waylaid by anything else, I came across Bhagavan, and though of course my understanding at first was very, very limited, I was able to recognize this is the real thing.
So coming back to this period once again, so did you have any kind of practice previously? Did you engage with Tibetan Buddhism or some kind of similar sadhana?
No, I didn't. I was interested to learn more about Tibetan Buddhism, but my friend who was my Canadian friend who was very much into it, he said you have to get initiation and all this, and somehow I never went down that path. I also, while I was in Rishikesh, I was visiting Shivananda Ashram, and I met one Swami. He claimed to be a disciple of Shivananda, but he wasn't living in Shivananda Ashram. And it was he actually who gave me Aldous Huxley's book, Perennial Philosophy. And I mean, I wasn't with, I met him a few times and we talked, and he was talking Advaita philosophy. But he was basically saying, you just have to see everything is Brahman. You just have to recognize everything is Brahman, which is just an imagination. If you imagine, okay, everything is Brahman, so what? I mean, it was, I wasn't very impressed by, and the only serious practice or meditation that I tried was this Goenka one, this Vipassana meditation, which was interesting, but it didn't seem to have any clear aim. Okay, you know, Nirvana is the aim, but what is Nirvana and what is the connection between this practice and Nirvana? And anyway, they tell you, no, Nirvana is far, far away. You're not going to, all you can do is you can do this practice and it will make your life more peaceful, and you'll I don't know, they're very vague. The aim of it was seemed to be all very vague. So it was only when I came to Bhagavan, but the aim became clear and the path became clear.
So in that time when you came back, when you came to Tamil Nadu and you met Sri Sadhu Om, you said spent some significant time with him in this.
Yes. So, that is, after reading Who Am I then wanted to understand clearly what is the practice. So I was reading whatever books I could get hold of. I remember reading Arthur Osborne had written one book, The Teachings of Ramana Maharshi in His Own Words, or something like that.
Yes.
So I read that. And he says there, but the practice is just to meditate on the heart on the right-hand side. I was totally unconvinced by that. That didn't seem to me to be right at all. And I was asking people in the ashram, and I couldn't find anyone who could say what the actual practice is. No, you just have to do who am I? Or you have to ask who am I? Or it was nothing seemed very clear. So I was trying to understand from the books. And I became friends with one young Malaysian person. He was actually a Tamilian from Malaysia. And he was reading the English translation of the English version of the Patha Sri Ramana, which he had borrowed from Sadhu Om. So he said after he had finished reading it, he may be able to lend it to me. But anyway, one day he took me to meet Sadhu Om. And when I went and met Sadhu Om, then I found I had actually already met him, because one day when I was going around the hill in the morning, because I'd heard Bhagavan had recommended doing Giri Pradakshina, so I enjoyed doing that. So the first thing I did when I went there, after 2 or 3 days, I climbed to the top of the hill, because I didn't at that time know about Pradakshina. But after that, I was told about Pradakshina. So I started doing Pradakshina quite frequently. And one day after I'd just been there a week or so, when I noticed the Ashtalinga shrines around the hill. In those days, it was before they had been renovated. So they were all in a fairly neglected condition. So on the north side, there's Kubiralingam. It's one of the 8 Ashtalinga temples around the hill. It's just a small shrine. So I was just curious to see what it was. I went inside. I just saw there was a linga and nothing else, and there was no gate or anything. So I just sat inside there, meditating or doing whatever meditation as I understood it. And while I was sitting inside there, I heard some voices outside. So I was a bit shy to come out because those voices, when people are there. So I waited a while, but those voices didn't go away. So in the end, I came out, and there was Sadhu. I didn't know who it was. There was a Sadhu and 2 other people, a man and his wife. They were sitting there and drinking tea or coffee from a thermos flask. And I think they had some fruits, so they offered me some fruits, and so I stayed with them for a little while, but I was quite shy, and not knowing who they were, I just took my leave and I left and went on. So about a week later, when this Malaysian friend took me to meet Sadhu Om, I found this is the Sadhu I had already met while going around the hill. When I think either that Malaysian friend had finished reading Patha Sri Ramana by that time, and so after I met Sadhu Om that time, I started reading Patha Sri Ramana. As soon as I read it, I understood, oh, this is the practice. That Sadhu Om is very clear, self-attention. That's what the practice is. That was very clear to me. So I then understood, here's someone who unlike anyone I met in the ashram, here's someone who actually understands the subject. So I started I started visiting him whenever I had any questions. But the more I visited him, the more I wanted to visit him, but I was a bit shy to go just for no purpose. So I wanted to have questions to ask. So I had heard that he was writing a Tamil explanation, a Tamil prose rendering of Guru Vachaka Kavai. And since Guru Vachaka Kavai was being translated by Professor Swaminathan, based mainly on Sadhu Om's prose rendering, it was being serialized in the Mountain Path. I read a few recent Mountain Paths in which those translations were there. And whenever I found a translation that wasn't clear to me, that was a pretext for me to go and meet Sadhu Om and ask him. So after I'd asked him about several times about verses of Guru Vacha Kavai, one day he said to me, this, because some of the translations weren't very accurate. So one day he said to me, since you're interested in this, why don't we start making our own translation? So from that time onwards, I was visiting him every day, and his English wasn't very good. So he would write a translation, usually on a slate or sometimes on piece of paper. And I would then ask him, question him about it, and I'd try and improve the way it was expressed in English. So in this way, we started our translation of Guru Vacha Kavai, but went on for a few years. Our earlier translations are not so accurate, but as I got more familiar with the subject and more began to pick up a little bit of Tamil, I think towards the later translations are probably more accurate than the earlier translations, but they're all fairly, I mean, they express, our translation expresses the general meaning of the verses quite accurately.
So you basically learned Tamil with him, right? Or
I began to pick up Tamil with him, but because I was with him then after we started this translation of Guru Vacha Kavai, that was about 8 years before he passed away. So I was with him basically for, well, more than 8 years, but 8 years it was, I was meeting him every day. And later on I moved in and I was living in the same compound. And while I had a small house was built for me in that compound, while my house was being built, I was actually staying in, he had a couple of rooms upstairs in one of the buildings there. So I actually stayed in the front hall where he received visitors. That's where I slept and lived for, I can't remember how long, maybe about 6 months while my house was being built. So my contact with him was from the time we started doing Guru Vacha Kavai, my contact with him was daily, and later on I was with him almost all, I mean, all of the waking state I was with him. I mean, I used to go for pradakshina every day. He would do, he would go for pradakshina on average probably about 3 times a week. So when he went, I would accompany him, or on other days I'd just go by myself.
So during this time, what was your impression of him generally? See, he has also, how many years has he spent with Bhagavan?
He was with Bhagavan he came to Bhagavan in 46. So he was about 4 years with Bhagavan, but he didn't, soon after he came to Bhagavan, he wanted to quit his job and settle in not in the ashram. It wasn't possible for people to stay in the ashram, but he wanted to stay nearby. But when he first came to Bhagavan, that is when he first heard about Bhagavan, he read Bhagavan's biography in Tamil, Ramana Vijayam, and he came from Tanjore. So he asked some friends, does anyone know about Ramana Maharshi? Is it possible just to go and meet him? And someone said, oh, there's a devotee of his called Janaki Mata. She lives nearby. If you go and meet her, she will be able to give you all information. So he went and he met Janaki Mata. And when he went there, she said, we are about to sing Aksharamlai, composed by Bhagavan. Do you know it? And he said, no, I don't know it. So they started to sing Aksharamlai. And that had a huge impact on him. He'd never heard, I mean, he was himself a Tamil poet, and he was very familiar with so much of Tamil devotional literature, but nothing he had heard to compare with Aksharamlai. It completely melted his heart. So after hearing that, he then told Janaki Mata, I want to visit Tiruvannamalai. I want to visit Ramanashram. Are there any rules or regulations? And she said, no, it's Bhagavan is open to everyone. we're going this weekend. If you like, you may accompany us. So that's when he first went to Bhagavan. So because he had gone with her, and he became very close to her, and when he decided that he was going to quit his job, he told her, I'm going to quit my job. So when we go to Tiruvannamalai next, I'm going to tell Bhagavan that I intend to quit my job. When they went next time, before he had a chance to tell Bhagavan, she said to Bhagavan, "Oh, Bhagavan, he's such a young boy, but he's planning to resign his job and to come here." And Bhagavan looked and said, "Oh, it's not necessary to resign the job." So because Bhagavan had said that, he felt he couldn't resign his job. But after some months later, he decided the mistake he had made was to tell anyone else. So when on one of his many, he was visiting ashram as often as he could. On one of his many visits, he wrote a letter of resignation. He put it in an envelope without sealing it and gave it to Bhagavan. Bhagavan opened it, read it, and he put it back in the envelope and returned it to him. So he took that as Bhagavan's blessing. So he sent off a letter of resignation, and he spent the next 3+ years. He was living in Palakottu, where many sadhus were living, just beside the ashram. So yeah, he was nearly 4 years with Bhagavan, but actually living there was just probably just over 3 years.
So what were your experiences when you had exchange with him during translations and during everyday life? What was your impression? Do you have any anecdotes or situations?
I probably do in context, they'll come to mind, but nothing in particular. Nothing particularly comes to my mind. But what I found, the more I was with him, the more, firstly, his very deep devotion to Bhagavan. His devotion to Bhagavan was infectious. So, as I say, I'd already been attracted to Bhagavan. I was already convinced by Bhagavan, but my devotion was greatly deepened by just being in contact with Sadhu Om, because, as I say, his devotion was infectious. That was one thing. The other thing is, I found he was an endless, a limitless font of clarity about Bhagavan's teachings. That is, however much I questioned him, the more I questioned him, the deeper and subtler answers I got from him. So I learned as time went on to question him relentlessly. Anything that wasn't completely convincing for me, or that I thought could be viewed in a different way, I would question him. And because I questioned him so much, that the more I questioned him, the more I learned from him. Not in terms of information, but in terms of clarity and depth of understanding. And as I mentioned to you last time, one thing I found was, when I was questioning him more and more deeply, I was getting more and more satisfying answers. And then sometimes I would hear people asking questions, and he would answer in a particular way. And I would think, why he answered to me differently? Why is he answering these people differently? So when I asked him, I didn't ask him immediately, but afterwards I would ask him, why, when you explained it like this to me, did you explain it like that to them? He said, because they're asking it a certain level, so the answer has to be according to that level. Because you're questioning me more deeply, I'm giving you deeper answers. He said, but he pointed out, he said, in the case of Bhagavan, if you read books like talks, you can see people ask very superficial questions. Bhagavan gives an answer. Instead of following up, they then jump to some other question. That they come with a list of questions in their mind. They want to ask all the questions. They don't follow up. But those who got the really deep teachings from Bhagavan, people like Śrī Aruṇācala, Murugan, and so on, they questioned Bhagavan very deeply. They didn't just stop with the first answer. That led to another, that each answer Bhagavan gave, they would question more deeply. The deeper one questions, the deeper the answers. So that's why the works like Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and Nāṉ Ār, why they're such deep works, it's because they were appropriate to the level of the questions that were asked, and which reflects the level of the questioner. So Sadhu Om said it will always be the case, because if the very deepest teachings are said at first, most people won't be willing to accept them. So more superficial answers and more roundabout answers are appropriate at first. And then if people want to question more deeply, then the deeper and simpler answers can be given. So I heard many answers from Sadhu Om of many different levels of explanation he gave, and I began to understand after some time. But in a way, I appreciate this much more now than I was able to appreciate then. How there are different levels of explanation, and how though the deeper explanations may seem to contradict the more superficial explanations, that doesn't mean the more superficial explanations are not appropriate in the context in which they're given. And you can see this in old Advaitic texts. I mean, if you see Advaita philosophy, there are all sorts of explanations are given. Many of them are very are appropriate to to people who are not ready to give up many of their beliefs, because we all come with a belief in that the body is I and that the world is real, and we are looking for, we try to reconcile whatever we hear with our existing beliefs. So because people are not ready to give up their belief in the at least some reality of the world, many explanations in Advaita make a distinction between waking and dream. Dream is pratipāsika satya, it's only a seeming reality, whereas waking is vivāharika satya, it's a transactional reality. So they attribute more reality to waking than to dream. They refer to dream, but they refer to dream like a dream. They use dream as an analogy. Whereas Bhagavan makes it very clear, waking is just another dream. It is no different from dream at all. In Nāṉ Ār, Bhagavan says, except that waking is long and dream is short, there's no other difference between them. But in Guru Vachaka Kavai, there's a verse in which he says, even that answer is not true, because it's only from the perspective of the waking state that the waking state seems long and dream seems short. When you're in a dream, you seem to be awake, and it seems to be you seem to have memories and everything, just like you have in the waking state. So it's only from the perspective of a waking state we say, oh, dream was just short, it was just a fleeting experience.
So I wanted to ask something else, but I will follow up this line now.
Right.
This line of thought. Since you mentioned the dream, and we have to, let's have a reference point as dreamers, as characters in the dream. So let's take it from there.
Right.
And if we say, and if we accept that person is a dream character, basically.
Yes.
If we take this reference point, and dream characters, what they tend to do generally is that they create illusions that are embedded in one illusion that is already there, present. So basically they build illusion upon illusion. One of these illusions is basically false sense of self, or identifications with objects, impressions, and so on. And from the other side, when we take when we consider this notion of intersubjective happening, what is happening between us, we tend to, being dream characters, we tend to idealize, to make idols of other dream characters. So this is happening generally in any community. So spiritual community is not different than any other community in that sense. People also tend to make idols from awakened people, as they did to many others. For example, Buddha said that he wasn't a god, or he wasn't the prophet or whatever, but he was only awakened. So basically it's a title of people tend to do that with also with Bhagavan. So basically, what would be your understanding in this sense of the teaching when it's presented in very simple and precise way? We could see that he's basically pointing us to what is already within us. So in other words, everyone has a direct possibility to attain it. And from the other side, devotees tend to idealize him in the sense of being a super being, in a sense, if you know what I mean. So what would be your position in this? How do you see it? As being dream characters who project and create other dreams.
Well, in the case of Bhagavan, idolizing him is in a sense appropriate, because there is absolutely no ego there. What is shining through that person, Ramana Maharshi, is only our own real nature, the supreme reality. So long as we experience ourselves as I am this little person, Bhagavan's name and form are fit to be venerated because of what is shining through them, which is that light of infinite love and infinite clarity. However, Bhagavan himself never encouraged anyone to worship him or idolize him. Bhagavan always directed people back to themselves. He said, the real guru is that which is shining in you as I. So, so long as we take, in verse 4 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan says, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. And what he says about God is applicable to Guru, because as he says, God and Guru are one and the same. So because we take ourselves to be the form of a body, Bhagavan seems to be a form. He seems to be a human being, a person. That is not what he actually is. What he actually is that which is shining in our heart as I. But so long as we experience ourselves as a body, his existence as a separate person, a divine person or whatever, is equally true. It's as true as our notion that we are this body. But why Guru appears in human form? Because our minds are outward turned, it's necessary for Guru to appear in human form in order to turn our attention back within. Bhagavan says in one place that this is a traditional analogy used in some Advaitic texts, but the Guru is like a tame deer that is used as a decoy to catch some wild deer. That's one analogy. Another analogy that Bhagavan often used is the Guru is like the lion seen by the elephant in its dream. There's a belief that elephants are so afraid of lions, if an elephant sees a lion in its dream, the shock will wake it up. So the lion seen in the elephant's dream is unreal, but it brings about the real awakening. Likewise, the name and form of a guru is unreal, but it shocks us out of this, out of our sleep of self-ignorance by turning our attention back within. So devotion to the external form of guru is not inappropriate, but what would be inappropriate is merely loving and adoring his outward form without putting his teachings into practice. Because why he appeared in this name and form, it was to turn our attention back towards ourselves.
So basically, if I understood it correctly, then we could say that puja ceremonies and generally this kind of devotional stand or aspect towards Bhagavan is something that could trigger this kind of awakening.
Well, I wouldn't say the grosser things won't trigger the awakening. That is
helpful along the way.
Yeah. I mean, some people are attracted to these more external forms of worship, puja and everything. No action can by itself purify the mind. As Bhagavan made clear in Upadēśa Undiyār, in verse 3, he said, action done for God, that is niṣkāmya karma, action done without desire, but for God. He says done for God. That means done for the love of God, it implies, will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. What is the key there is that the action, the puja or japa or dhyana, that is, puja means for physical worship, japa means for vocal worship, and dhyana is meditation or mental worship. They should be, the mere action themselves don't purify the mind. What purifies the mind is the love with which they're done. That is, instead of doing the puja or japa or dhyana for the fulfillment of any desire, we are doing it just for love. That is, it is the love that purifies the mind. So there are many people who are devotees of Bhagavan who worship him like they would worship any deity in a temple. They think that if they worship Bhagavan, he will make their life easier. He'll remove difficulties. He'll help them to pass their exams. He'll help them to get their daughters married. He'll help them to get a promotion in their job. Whatever is their aim, they worship. That is kamya upasana. That is that in a very, very gradual way that will bring people to the path, because sooner or later, if someone is following a kamya upasana, that is, if they're doing any form of spiritual or that is religious practice or spiritual practice for the fulfillment of desires, after many, many lives of doing this, slowly, a love for God that is, the more God fulfills their desires, the more gratitude they feel to God, and slowly they begin to develop love for God, and slowly they begin to understand God is doing all these things for me, how kind he is. So their love for God increases, and they come to the stage where they're willing, where they're ready to love God for his own sake, rather than for what they can get for him. So just doing any form of worship, whether it's by physical worship or vocal worship in form of japa or mental worship, it's not the action that purifies the mind, it's the love with which we do it. That's why Bhagavan says the niṣkāmya karma done with love, done for God, or implying with love for God, will purify the mind and show the way to liberation. What he means by show the way to liberation, it will give us it will purify and clarify the mind and give the mind the clarity to recognize that liberation can be attained only by turning within, in other words, by self-investigation. So he says that in verse 3. Then in verse 4, he said there are three kinds of niṣkāmya karma we can do with love for God. They are actions of mind, of body, speech, and mind. Puja, action by body, japa, action by speech, and meditation, action by mind. In this order, they are more effective, or they are superior, he said. What he means by superior, they're more efficacious in purifying the mind. That is, rather than doing physical worship, if you're doing japa, that will purify your mind more effectively. And if you're doing meditation, it will purify your mind more effectively. Then in the next 3 verses, he describes each of these. In verse 5, he describes puja. But the implication in this context is that these are niṣkāmya. They're done for love, not for any gain. So the puja in verse 5, japa in verse 6, and in 7, dhyana. But then in verse 8, he says that up to 7, we're still on the path of niṣkāmya karma. We're still doing actions. Because so long as you're meditating on God as something other than yourself, that meditation is a mental action. So in verse 8, he says, rather than anya bhava, that means meditating on God as something other than oneself, ananya bhava, that means meditating on God as not other than oneself, ananya bhava, in which he is I, is of all that is best. That is, all types of spiritual practice, meditating on oneself is better than meditating on anything else. It's better, it's the best of all forms of spiritual practice. What does he mean by the best? It's the most effective in purifying the mind. So what he calls there ananya bhava, meditation on what is not other than oneself, means self-investigation. So he shows, and self-investigation is not a karma, it's not an action, because so long as we're attending to something other than ourselves, our attention is moving away from ourselves towards that other thing. In self-attentiveness, our attention is going back within, and that so long as our attention is going outwards, ego is rising. So long, when the intention begins to go back within, ego begins to subside. So self-investigation is not an action; it is a cessation of action. It is that is the more keenly we attend to ourselves, the closer we come to a state of just being as we are. So that is of all the best. So Bhagavan shows there how these outward forms of work. Firstly, you have to discard the kamya. You first have to give up worshipping God for what you can get from him. You need to worship him for the love of himself. Then only the spiritual path begins. So long as you're worshipping God for this or for that, that is not spiritual. That is kamyata. That is doing such action, that is worshipping for the fulfillment of desires. So only when you come to niṣkāmya is the real bhakti or real spiritual path beginning. So the spiritual path begins with niṣkāmya karma. Niṣkāmya karma, Bhagavan defines as puja, japa, and dhyana. That is, it has to be done with the love of God. Well, you can do niṣkāmya karma without bringing in God. That will also purify the mind if you're really doing, for example, if with a really selfless motive, you're helping to alleviate other people's suffering or the suffering of animals, that can also purify the mind. But so that does
like in Buddha Dharma.
Yeah, that does fit under a form of puja. Because even if you're not thinking of it in terms of worshipping God, you are worshipping the reality in each of those beings, because you see yourself in every other being, at least to some extent. So when you see others suffering, you feel the suffering because you picture yourself in that position. So without specific love for God in a name and form, so long as it is with love that you are doing your service, that is a type of niṣkāmya puja. But it's mainly connected with the path of bhakti. So the path of bhakti, the earlier stages of the path of bhakti are what are called niṣkāmya karma or karma yoga. That is the early stages of the path of bhakti. But when bhakti matures, we not only, that is ultimately, when love matures, we want to give ourselves to the object, to the one we love. So it's when we come to the, not just surrendering our will to God, but surrendering ourselves to God. That's when the bhakti matures, and we turn towards this path of self-investigation. Because only by investigating ourselves can we surrender ourselves. Because the self we have to investigate is this ego. So long as we take ourselves to be this ego, and we take God to be other than ourselves, we can surrender our will to God, at least to some extent, but we cannot surrender ourselves to God. We have to recognize that we are nothing other than God. So we are returning ourselves to God. And in order to surrender ourselves, we need to know what we actually are. So we need to turn within. So the surrender reaches a stage of maturity when it becomes self-investigation. Self-investigation is the most effective way of surrendering ourselves. In fact, it's the only way to surrender ourself, the ego, the root of all the desires and attachments that we're trying to give up.
So I'm following up.
Right.
I thought we were going to. I had some ideas previously, but now it's. I'm going through this track now. I'm following up what you said. So basically, I have two questions within this, because you mentioned two topics. So first, what I wanted to say about this dream character idea and idealization generally. Does this, the first part of your answer, does it imply that once attainment happens and Atma-vichara is, so to say, finished, or one is resolved and one is released, in that time, in that moment, all these other idealizations in the dream character world disappear? Does that imply then that pujas and seeing Bhagavan as something separate in a statue or in a picture, or worship or any kind of sadhana also disappears?
That is all forms.
Does that imply that?
Yes, it does. All forms, all phenomena exist only in the view of ourself as ego. Only when we take ourselves to be the form of this body are we aware of other forms, as he says in verse 4 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. So it is only when we rise as ego that all this multiplicity is there. That is why he says in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if ego comes into existence, everything comes into existence. If ego doesn't exist, everything doesn't exist. Everything here means all forms, all phenomena. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what this ego is giving up everything. Why is it giving up everything? Because if we to the extent to which we investigate ego, to that extent does ego subside and dissolve back into its source. So if we investigate this ego keenly enough and see ourselves as we actually are, ego will be completely swallowed by the light of pure awareness. When ego is swallowed, everything else is swallowed with it. So investigating what this ego is giving up everything. So yes, when ego is annihilated, all names, forms, all differences, all duality, everything disappears. What remains is the infinite light of infinite and eternal and unchanging light of pure awareness, which is what we always actually are. Mm-hmm. So in that state, there are no differences.
So is that...
However, from the perspective of ego, when we look outwards, we see Bhagavan, we say, Bhagavan is a jnani. So it seems to us, in our view, Bhagavan is worshipping Aruṇācala. So there seem to be differences. So even after realization, Bhagavan is still worshipping his guru, Aruṇācala. That is true from our perspective, but But what we take to be Bhagavan, the person we take to be Bhagavan, is not what Bhagavan actually is. What Bhagavan actually is the pure awareness I am. So there is no difference between the worshipper, Bhagavan, and the worshipped Aruṇācala. They are one and the same thing, vastu, one and the same substance, one and the same reality. It's only in our view that they seem to be two different forms. Likewise, with any devotee of Bhagavan, say Murugan, we can take it Murugan had been swallowed by Bhagavan, that is the ego that was Murugan. But Murugan, till the end of his life, he was the humble devotee of Bhagavan. He never took, he was never ready to accept the role of guru. He said, Bhagavan alone is the guru for all of us. So from the perspective of ego that sees others as jnani or ajnani, the differences remain. But if they actually, what is the jnani? Bhagavan used to say, jnana me jnani. Jnana alone is the jnani. What does that mean? Jnana means pure awareness. Jnani means what knows pure awareness. So pure awareness alone knows pure awareness. Is the implication when he says jnana me jnani. So jnana alone is the jnani. Bhagavan is nothing but that jnana. But in our view, Bhagavan seems to be a person. So he seems to be different to Aruṇācala. So he's singing Aruṇācala Stuti Panchakam. He's going around doing Giri Pradakshina, worshipping Aruṇācala. We need to distinguish the two perspectives. That is, Bhagavan often used to say, when people said, oh, but the jnani is still, even after realization, the jnani still walks, talks, and does all the actions. Bhagavan said, yes, in your view. It's only in our view that the jnani seems to be a person and seems to be doing all these things. In the view of the jnani, there is only jnana, nothing but jnana.
So,
and jnana is infinite, indivisible, formless, pure awareness.
Ever present,
ever unchanging.
Ineffable.
Yeah.
So once this happens, can we say then that the one continues to live, the body continues in the body consciousness continues in this Sahaja Samadhi state, and I don't know if you found this anywhere in the literature, the answer to this, or did Ramana talk about it? I haven't seen it, but I'm wondering. Once one gets into this flow of Sahaja Samadhi, the natural state of being, does he experiences some kind of nirvikalpa later on, or is it just pure undivided presence without any kind of trance-like states or like previously?
Who are you talking about?
The one that experiences it.
Sahaja Samadhi.
Yeah.
Sahaja Samadhi is just another name for jnana. Who experiences jnana? Jnana alone experiences jnana.
But is it always like I don't know if I make sense with it. If you understood it, what I was trying to say, does one experience the dhyana? Does it go out of? Is it continuous? Does trance-like state happens before, as before?
Yeah, it's not a trance-like state. I mean, that I don't think trance is a very appropriate word for it.
I think the trance-like states that were happening before, like for example, when one is absorbed, for a longer period of time in Atma-vichara, then one can experience this kind of turning off of the two worlds, so to say. If you know what I mean.
Okay. What Bhagavan means by Sahaja Samadhi is our natural state of pure awareness. In the view of the onlooker, Bhagavan is in Sahaja Samadhi, we can say. But even to say he's in Sahaja Samadhi, it sounds like you've got two things. You've got one Bhagavan, and you've got a state called Sahaja Samadhi, and he's in that state. That is the words fail us. He is Sahaja Samadhi.
Yeah.
That is, Sahaja Samadhi means the pure self-awareness. He is that. He is nothing other than that.
Let's just talk about states.
In our view, in the view of the Ajnani, the ego, Bhagavan seems to be a person. So many people misunderstand when Bhagavan talks about Sahaja Samadhi. They think, oh, you can be in Samadhi and you can do anything. You can walk and talk and everything. That is from the view of others, or well, in the view of Vijnani, there are no others. But from our view, Bhagavan, who is in that state of pure awareness, seems to be doing all these actions because Bhagavan hasn't written Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, he hasn't written Nāṉ Ār, he hasn't answered any questions, he hasn't done anything. He is just as he is. But in our view, Bhagavan seems to be that person who has written Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and done all these things. But all that is only in our view. That is the lion appearing in the elephant's dream. That is his writing Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and Nāṉ Ār and all these things, and Arunachala Stuti Panchakam. This is all part of the role of the lion appearing in the elephant's dream.
Mm.
His name and form exists only in our view. Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu and Nāṉ Ār and Arunachala Stuti Panchakam all exist only in our view. In his view, there is only that pure awareness, which is the real Arunachala, which is the real Uḷḷadu.
Mm. So then, would you say that
when we talk about Vijnani, we need to be very clear. We need to make this clear distinction between Vijnani as he appears to us to be, that is, as a person, and Vijnani as it actually is. Even say he is wrong, because again we're
projecting?
The it. That is, Vijnani is it, not he or she. So in our view, it seems to be a person, Bhagavan Ramana.
Mm.
What in its view, it is only the one and only thing that actually exists, which is pure awareness, I am. So we need to be, what Bhagavan actually means by Sahaja Samadhi is that state of pure awareness. But from the view of others, Bhagavan, who is firmly established in that state of Sahaja Samadhi, seems to be doing actions, yes.
Yeah.
But it's only in our view, not in his view.
Let's take the reference point of Adhyani.
Right. Ego. Let's say ego. Simple.
Ego.
One.
Yes. and take and let's just talk about states.
Yeah.
For this moment, and just let's say that in the beginning of finding out something, in the beginning of seeking, let's say. One hears the information, hears the gospel, the good truth, the good news, and then one goes into seeking, and ego starts to do some kind of sadhana. Okay, so let's say Atma-vichara, and so that would be the first. I'm just using words now to. Of course, they are not precise, but just using it as tools. As it can be used. So the other state, let's say, after that one, would be state of immersing oneself within the awareness or the pure nature and so on. So in that immersing, one could experience some kind of, okay, if we don't want to use the words trance-like states, or some kind of states that are not necessarily connected with what we call the world, some kind of states that change, could give us insight, or what people generally in religious traditions called mystical experience, or something like that. So something that disconnects one from the world. And the third stage would be the stage of the natural state, the Sahaja, let's say. So then one becomes jnani, of course, and then all of this disappears. So if we say that just for the sake of this conversation, if we say that these three states exist, if we take it to be existent, would you say that when one is immersed, or one becomes one with the Sahaja state, one becomes one with his pure nature, then one doesn't experience any kind of phenomena from the second stage, any kind of phenomena like going out of himself, or, for the lack of the better word, or trance-like state, or something like that. Is the view of in this state, is it continuous?
Yeah. Okay.
Does it make sense?
I think I understand what you're saying. Firstly, Bhagavan has simplified things greatly. The only samadhi Bhagavan recommended is Sahaja Samadhi. Other types of samadhi, what is called Kevala Nirvikalpa Samadhi, is just a state of Manolaya. It's a sleep-like state. Other types of samadhi, Savikalpa Samadhi, and they classify so many different types. Those may be all, those are more to do with yoga than really this path. In Bhagavan's path, the only practice, that is, though he used the term Sahaja Samadhi to describe our final goal, the state of pure awareness, he also sometimes spoke about practicing Sahaja Samadhi. What is the practice of Sahaja Samadhi? Self-investigation. That is, in the introduction he wrote to his Tamil translation of Drikdrisya Viveka, he refers to the practice of Sahaja Samadhi, and he says it's always investigating oneself without the distinction between inside and outside. So the practice we are doing, when we're trying to turn our attention back towards ourselves, we are beginning to practice Sahaja Samadhi. As we go deeper and deeper in this practice, the deeper we go in this practice, the more other things will recede into the background of our awareness. And eventually, when we manage to turn the full 180 degrees, so to speak, back towards ourselves, and therefore away from all other things, all phenomena disappear from our awareness altogether. And we then are aware of nothing other than ourselves. That is the state of pure awareness in which ego is eradicated, and we remain as pure awareness, which is the state of Sahaja Samadhi.
So would you say that there is some correlation between Zen parables and analogies when they use this story of chopping wood and carrying water, or in another parable there is this notion of they say firstly there are mountains and there are rivers, and then there is no mountain and river, and then again there is a mountain and river. This kind of parables. Would you say that it's correlate to this idea?
Yes, but we need to understand this more deeply. It is said that the jnani sees the world. For example, even in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan said, verse 17 and 18, what does Bhagavan say? Bhagavan says, it's very important to read this deeply because it can very easily be misunderstood. If not,
which verse is it?
17 and 18 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. Bhagavan says, for those who do not know themselves, and for those who have known themselves, the body is actually I. So this seems to imply that the jnani is aware of the body. But then he goes on to say, for those who do not know themselves, I is only the extent of the body. For those who have known themselves within the body, oneself, I, shines without limit. Consider that the difference between them is only this. So what he is saying here is, but both for the jnani and the ajnani, the body is actually I. But for the ajnani, the I is just limited to the extent of the body, whereas for the ajnani, I shines without limit. What does he mean when he says it shines without limit? We need to think deeply about it. All forms are limits. So long as we're aware of forms, we are not aware of. We are still within the. We are still experiencing I as a limit, within limits. What he means here is, this is like saying, for one who does not know the rope, and for one who has known the rope, the snake actually exists. For those who do not know the rope, the snake is only a snake, whereas for those who do know the rope, the snake is only a rope. That is, but the jnani is seeing exactly the same as we are seeing it. But whereas we are seeing the one infinite awareness as a subject and multiple objects, a subject, namely ourself, this ego, and all multiple objects, all the phenomena or other forms, the jnani is seeing only the pure awareness. So what we are seeing as a body and taking to be I is what the jnani sees as pure awareness, which for him is I, for it is I. So Bhagavan isn't, though it seems here, if you read it superficially, Bhagavan is implying here that the jnani is aware of the body, and he for him the body is also I, and everything else is I. What he's actually saying here is that I alone exists. What the ajnani sees as body and world are what the jnani sees as I. And without any limit, without any limit means without any form. And then verse 18, he says, is a parallel verse. He says, for those who do not have knowledge, and for those who have, that means knowledge here means knowledge of themselves, who do not have self-knowledge. For those who do not have knowledge, and for those who have, the world is real. So that means both for the jnani and for the ajnani, the world is real. But then he explains this. For those who do not know, reality is to the extent of the world. What is the extent of the world? All the names and forms. That's my explanation. And then he says, for those who have known, reality pervades devoid of form as the support of the world. Support is their adharam. So what he's saying is, when he says that for jnani the world is real, he's not saying the names and forms are real, but the substance, the support, for that which appears as these names and forms, that is real. In other words, what he referred to in the previous verse as oneself, I, is what he refers to here as the adharam. That is the pure awareness is the substance that appears as all these names and forms, but it appears as names and forms only in the view of the ajnani. In the view of the jnani, it pervades devoid of form, that without any limitation, without any separation. Then he said, this is the difference between them, consider. So though he seems to be saying here what they say in Zen, but at first the mountains are mountains, and then there are no mountains, and then the mountains are mountains. What he is saying is, at first the mountains are mountains. Then when you recognize the reality of the mountains, what the mountains actually are, which is the infinite space, the mountains are nothing other than that. That is, when we know ourselves as pure awareness, we know that all that previously appeared as mountains and trees and rivers and other people and so on, are nothing but ourself, for pure awareness. So in the view of the jnani, there is only pure awareness. That is like saying, for the jnani, there is only gold. For the ajnani, There are bangles and rings and necklaces and so many other ornaments, gold ornaments. But for Vijnani, there's only gold.
Because he sees the substance.
He sees the substance. This relates back to verse 13. What he says in verse 13 is Jnanamam Tane Me. Oneself who is jnana. Jnana here means awareness, pure awareness. Oneself who is awareness alone is real. What does he mean by real? Real means what actually exists. What is unreal doesn't actually exist, it merely seems to exist. So he's saying here what actually exists is only oneself, which is who are pure awareness, jnana. Then he says, Nāṇavam jnanam ajnanamam. That literally means awareness or jnana that is manifold is ignorance. So long as we are aware of manyness, that is ignorance, he says. In an earlier version of this verse, what he says in this verse as Nāṇavam jnanam, which is literally awareness that is many, or jnana that is many, or manifold, or various, or diverse. What he said in the earlier version of this verse, when he first composed it, was Nāna Vaikankinja jnana. That means awareness that sees as many. The implication is what is actually there is only one. But the ego is that awareness which sees that one as many. So that is ignorance. That awareness of multiplicity is ignorance. So if we say Vijnani is aware of all the names and forms of the world, as many people believe, then we are saying Vijnani is ignorant, because according to Bhagavan, awareness of multiplicity of nana means various or different or diverse. So awareness of diversity, of multiplicity, of plurality is ignorance according to Bhagavan. Then he says in the next sentence, even ignorance, that is that awareness of multiplicity, which is unreal. He says unreal is very important here. Even ignorance which is unreal does not exist except as oneself who is awareness. And to explain that, he gives an analogy. All the many ornaments are unreal. Say, do they exist except as gold, which is real? So according to Bhagavan, the substance alone is real. The forms are unreal. That's why he says all the many ornaments are unreal. Say, do they exist except as gold? So what is that he using this as an analogy for? The knowledge of multiplicity, which is ignorance, he compares to the ornaments. That is unreal. But all that knowledge of multiplicity, it has no existence except as oneself, who is the pure awareness. So the substance is only ourself, pure awareness. The awareness of multiplicity is compared to all the different forms that gold may assume. But what is real is only the gold, not the forms. What is real is only the pure awareness, not the manifold forms. So Bhagavan says explicitly in verse 18, but in spite of his saying explicitly, but the reality shines devoid of form, though he says that explicitly, there are still people who misinterpret and say, no, Bhagavan has, even in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan has said the world is real. For not only for the Ajnani, also for the Jnani, the world is real. Bhagavan teachings are very deep and very subtle, and he expresses them in a very nuanced way. So when he says that for the Jnani, the world is real, he's not saying that the names and forms are real. What is it that appears as those names and forms? Yes, the snake is real, but it's not real as a snake. It's real only as a rope. Because what actually is there is only the rope.
Just a small digression.
Yes.
Just one small question within that. When we say real, and when you say real, generally in Advaita, when reality is concerned and definition of what is real, it is always connected with the idea of something being eternal, as I understand it. So basically, when they say something is not real, it means that its nature is prone to destroying, or prone to disappearing, or destruction, or dying, and so on. So when we say something is real, we mean something is eternal. Would you agree to that?
I would agree to that. That is, Bhagavan sometimes defined reality as that which is eternal, unchanging, and self-shining. That is the definition of reality given by Bhagavan. But where Bhagavan differs from many of the older explanations, in some Advaitins will distinguish between mithya and asat. They say the world, for example, it is mithya, but it's not asat. It does exist, but it's not what it appears to be, or something like that. They go into very elaborate. They draw distinctions where no distinctions need be drawn, and they go into elaborate explanations to justify those distinctions. That is all for people who are trying to reconcile. This world is not Paramarthika Satya, but it is Vyavaharika Satya. It's perfectly real. That is, we're trying to reconcile. According to Bhagavan, Paramarthika Satya alone is Satya. Everything else is totally unreal. So when Bhagavan talks about real and unreal, what he means by real is what actually exists. What he means by unreal is what seems to exist but does not actually exist. So this world, yes, it seems to exist, but it doesn't actually exist. It doesn't actually exist as world, but it does exist as pure awareness, because that's its substance. The substance, the pure awareness I am, that is the soul substance. That alone is real. That's why he begins this verse 13 saying, Jnanamam tane me. That is oneself who is jnana alone is real. So according to Bhagavan, there is nothing other than jnana. Nothing, and that jnana is what we actually are. Jnana means pure awareness.
So coming back to this notion, what you mentioned previously, what you said a few minutes ago, to this.
Can I just say one thing on that?
Yeah, sure.
I believe I'm correct in saying that many Advaitins will distinguish between what is mithya and what is asat. So they say the world is not asat, but it is mithya. The world exists only in the view of the body consisting of 5 sheaves. According to Bhagavan, in verse 22 of Upadēśa Undiyār, what Bhagavan says in verse 22 of Upadēśa Undiyār is he's referring to the 5 sheaves. Since what he refers to here is body, mind, intellect, life, and darkness. That is the 5 sheaves. So he said, since these 5 are all jada and asat, that is jada, they're not aware. Asat, they don't exist. They are not I, which is sat. So Bhagavan, according to Advaitins, they'll say, oh yes, the 5 sheaves are mithya, but they're not asat. According to many Advaitins who draw distinctions between what is mithya and what is totally asat, unreal, non-existent. Whereas according to Bhagavan, it's all asat, it's all totally non-existent. That doesn't mean they don't seem to exist. They do seem to exist, but whose view do they seem to exist? Only in the view of ego. So whatever seems to exist in the view of ego, even though it doesn't actually exist, that is what Bhagavan calls unreal. So when he talks about unreal, he means it merely seems to exist. He concedes that it seems to exist in the view of ego, but it doesn't actually exist.
So coming back to this this notion that you mentioned previously about bhakti and devotion part
Yeah.
of vichara, and
Yeah.
this differentiation between what is the path of dhyana and what is the path of bhakti and so on, and how this devotional aspect can be.
I didn't say that. I didn't distinguish bhakti from jnana. The
I know.
The preliminary stages of bhakti are before it merges into the path of jnana. But the path of jnana is the path of pure bhakti.
Yeah. So would you say then that performing of bhakti, having devotional services, and being a devotee of another tradition, let's say, being a Vaishnava or being a Christian or Muslim or Jewish and so on, would you say that performing dhyana or performing of devotion towards some deity, personal deity, could bring one to the same realization as dhyana would?
That Bhagavan has clearly said that the implication of those of verses 3 to 7 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, I mean of Upadēśa Undiyār, is exactly that. Bhagavan doesn't say it has to be you only worship Aruṇācala or only worship Shiva or whatever name and form doesn't matter. What matters is the love with which it's done. So whatever your path, whether you're a Christian or a Buddhist or a Muslim or whatever, it's the love with which you approach this path. That is what's important. Names and forms are not important, because the reality is that which shines devoid of name and form, but which in the view of the ego appears as all these names and forms. Names and forms of the world and names and forms of God.
So would you say then, let's say that one is specifically devoted to certain type of manifestation?
Yes.
And as we know, in India, there are plenty of different manifestations, which are pretty sometimes even exclusive to some point. For example, I would mention Kali, or Shiva or Vishnu on the other hand. And if we say, let's say devotion towards Jehovah or Allah or so on, so would you say then if we know that these attributes that Absolute is manifested through, these attributes are obviously different in the sense of, you know what I mean? If I mention Kali, you know what I mean. So one is in a sense, could it happen then if one focuses his attention or on specific type of attribute and devotes oneself, could it happen then that one becomes entrapped within it, one becomes limited by it? Because the very nature of this manifestation, of any manifestation, is the form. So if the focus of the mind, the focus of the devotional aspect, devotion itself, if it becomes focused on the form, then naturally one would conclude that it can bring only limitation. Would you agree to that?
Yes, but the key to the path of bhakti is the love. Bhakti. At an immature stage, you see God limited as whatever is your concept of God, whether it is the formless Allah or Kali with her so many arms and all the attributes of Kali. But as the love grows deeper, the idea that God is limited to any form begins to dissolve. You begin to see everything as that. Because you see God is acting through everything, both the good and the bad in life, all are given by him or her, whatever you choose to say. So it's all a matter of a maturing of the bhakti. as if a person is sincerely following the bhakti marga, their love will mature, and with the maturing of their love will come a purification of the mind, and therefore a clarification of the mind. So it's only the mind that is still clouded with impurities, but that will be fanatical. Oh no, my name and form of God, Kali alone is God, Vishnu is the top God, or Allah, or Allah is formless, he's above all other gods, there are no other gods, there's only Allah. Whatever, I mean, you see the religious people, they can be extremely narrow-minded. That shows a lack of maturity of love. When the love matures, with the maturing of love comes clarity. With clarity, you begin to see beyond these names and forms. Though those followers of the Abrahamic religion, particularly the Christians, are a bit wishy-washy in this respect, but Muslims and Jews are very strict. God has no form. To worship God in form is idol worship.
Yes.
Even their idea,
and it is very condemned within the traditions.
Yeah. But even their idea of formless God, like every sincere Jew, pious Jew or Muslim has some idea about God. Even the idea God is formless is a mental concept. That mental concept is itself a form. So we cannot, so long as we experience ourselves as a form, we cannot know God as formless. So everyone who worships God as other than himself is worshipping a form, because even if you're saying God is formless, you're still worshipping that concept of a formless God. That concept is
because it's a mental
form. It's
conception.
But as the love matures, we go beyond our limited conception of God. How can my little mind understand God? God is infinite, the infinite whole. God is far greater than anything I can possibly conceive. That is when the love is maturing. And then the idea that my God alone is the real God, all the other gods are false gods, that will drop off. And the more ego, the more the love for God grows, the more ego will subside, and the more humble it will be, and the more it will be ready to see the divine in every religion, in every form of worship.
Yes.
So limitations drop off
I totally
to the
agree.
extent that our love matures. And that's why eventually we come to understand God is not just this form or not just this idea. God is that which is shiny in everything. God is not only everything else. God is what is shining in me as I. So our love, that is the distinction between ourself and God drops off. That is what Bhagavan refers to in verse 8 of Upadēśa Undiyār, that rather than the Anya Bhava, the Ananya Bhava is best of all. That is how we come from the Anya Bhava to the Ananya Bhava. As our love for God matures, we begin to see that he alone exists, that there's nothing other than him. He is the one infinite whole. How can there be anything other than him? How can even I be other than him? Bhagavan expresses it beautifully in the 7th verse of, I think it's maybe, is it 7th? Let me just see. In Aruṇācala Padigam, get the verse. Verse 7, yes. Verse 7 of Aruṇācala Padigam. What Bhagavan says is, if all the bhutas, that means the 5 elements, namely space, air, fire, water, and earth, and bodhikas, that means everything that's composed of these elements, which expand or spread out as many living beings, do not exist besides you, the space of light. That implies the light of pure awareness. Who else am I? So if all these five elements and everything that is made of these five elements and this vast universe full of so many living beings, if none of these are other than you or exist besides you or are anything other than you, the space of light of pure awareness, who else am I? And then he says in the next sentence, "O blemishless, if you shine without another in the heart as that space," meaning the space of pure awareness, who am I who come out as another? That is, as ego we rise as if we're something other than God. So if you are shining in the heart without anything other than you, that is the infinite whole, for the infinite whole, there can't be anything other than the infinite whole. The infinite space of pure awareness, nothing can be other than that. So when you shine in without another, then what is this I that rises as if it's another? And then he ends with a beautiful prayer. Aruṇācala, come out, placing your vast lotus feet on his head. That means on the head of this ego. That's a beautiful, beautiful verse. But that shows when the love matures, we begin to see everything. We begin to see God in everything. Because our love for him, how can anything be other than God? How can anything even exist independent of God? How can anything appear independent of God? God alone exists. So as our love for God increases, then we understand, then we come to recognize that nothing is other than him. Even this I that rises as if another is not other than him. So what should we do? We should surrender ourselves completely back to him. We should pray to him, come and crush this ego. Place your lotus feet on his head. That's a beautiful, beautiful verse.
Yeah. So we can conclude then whatever from these three paths one practices, one becomes one with, one will eventually attain the same thing.
There is no other way. There is no other way.
So either one is naturally for some reason drawn to japa repetitions or mantra meditations, repeating the names of God and so on, or whether or not one is practicing daily prayers for Abrahamic religions, or one is practicing just bhakti devotion, or one is following the self-investigation process, inquiring into I, then basically the very point is from one of the dialogues, if I remember correctly. I forgot right now, I cannot remember the name of the person who asked that question at that time, but he said that he's already practicing some japa, but apparently there has not been some effect or something like that, if I remember correctly. So Ramana told him to inquire, to investigate who is this I who is doing it, who is this I, to try to find the I who is doing the practice. So would you say then in that sense, whatever one is drawn to for some reason naturally, because of one's predispositions, or one could attain the same state?
Yes, but we have to follow the path. In order to attain, we've got to follow the route. That is, depending where we are on our journey, different types of practices will appeal to us. But if our love for needs to mature, as we follow the path, our love is maturing, and as the love matures, we need the distinction between ourselves and God slowly begins to dissolve, and eventually we want to give ourselves wholly to God. And how can we give ourselves wholly to God? Who is this I who thinks it's self-separate from God? We have to investigate this I. That is, without that is, Bhagavan said, all roads lead to the city, but whatever road you come on, you have to enter the gate. The gate is this self-investigation. There's only one gate. That is, we need to turn, our attention is always going outwards. Whatever path we're following, whether it's bhakti or yoga or Islam or Judaism or Christianity or Buddhism or whatever, our attention is going outwards, away from ourselves, from the vast majority of our journey. But the journey can be completed only when our attention turns back within.
Kingdom of heaven is within.
Not only that, he didn't only say the kingdom of heaven is within. He said, look, see, the kingdom of heaven is within. Merely saying, oh, kingdom of heaven is within is of no use to us. We need to experience that. We need to look within to see it. Yeah, we have to turn the attention. Whatever route we go, what we are seeking is within ourselves. So until we turn our mind within and merge back into the source from which we rose, we cannot attain that. So all these other paths, they're tributaries. But in order to merge in the ocean, they have to join the main river. The main river is self-investigation.
Mm-hmm. So that would be a natural evolvement.
It's a natural evolvement. As the love develops, the distinction between ourself and God, it diminishes. It naturally, that is, as our love for him increases, we begin to recognize more and more clearly that he is the one infinite whole. So how can there be anything other than him? So who is this I who has risen as something other? We need all this otherness seems to exist only when we rise as ego. So what is this ego? Who is this spurious I who claims to be separate from God? Who seems to be separate from God? We need to investigate this I. By investigating it, we are thereby returning it to him, surrendering it to him.
Until separation dissolves.
Yeah. And that what remains then is him he alone. How does he remain? Shining as I am, because he is I am.
Yeah. So I think that is the best way to end the conversation. This the last sentence could be.
We begin with I am and we end with I am.
Yes, we begin and we end with it.
And we never leave it.